Welcome to another philosophical conversation. I'm Cadell Last, and we have a very special panel of guests today to talk about a project that I've been associated with for several years and is close to my heart, the School of Thinking. The School of Thinking is associated with the Free University of Brussels in Belgium, but the School of Thinking is also an international program, so you don't necessarily need to be living in Brussels or Belgium to attend. It's open to international applicants, and it offers something I think which is very unique, which is an opportunity not just to study one particular field, say mathematics or philosophy or cognitive science or whatever the field. It offers a chance to explore a multiplicity of different thought pathways and also explore their interconnections and their intersections. And it's also not just taught by one person, but by a multiplicity of different experts and people who are specialized in certain types of thought, whether that be cognitive science, whether that be ethical thinking, for example, whether that be dialectical thinking, which is actually what I've taught at the School of Thinking for 3 years. So let's go straight to the panel. What we're going to do is we've got 3 core members of the School of Thinking with us, and 4 including myself, and we're just going to introduce you to some of the personalities, the great minds, and the ideas behind the School of Thinking, a little bit about the history of the School of Thinking, in anticipation for what's to come in 2023 and 2024, which I think will be yet another iteration which opens up several challenges and great opportunities at the same time. So welcome, everyone. Marta, why don't you lead us off and we'll go from there.
Hello. Very happy to be here. And hello to all the entire audience of Cadell's enterprise here, which I've been watching and admiring for some time already. We have been doing this School of Thinking project together already for several years, and it has a even longer history in our conversations before it started. So it's like I feel it's a shared activity that we've been involved together already for a long time. You asked first for an introduction, so I'm broadcasting from Brussels currently, sitting like as a proper Brazilian in a cafe. And I've been living in Belgium already for 8 years, and this is where we met because Cadell was doing his PhD at the same time when I arrived, and we have been working together at CLEA Center at the Free University of Brussels, which is an interdisciplinary research center for thinking science and philosophy and research. Somehow in the wild, without the clear guidance and scaffoldings of existing rigors of disciplines. So and basically, the way I remember those years is mostly sitting at cafes, actually one of them mostly, and discussing things and discussing a lot of our interest in research. And if you ask how the beginnings of the School of Thinking, how it came to be, it was basically those conversations. So I like this memory a lot. As to my own background, my research is mostly in kind of intersection of understanding social processes and epistemology. So you could say it's social epistemology, to create a concise name, but it's not really how social processes change the way we perceive. But my interest for most of the time was how social processes themselves can be understood as subjects of cognition and themselves cognitive agents. Yeah, so I think this is the most general and like, you know, persistent interest, and I'm busy with many different things, more and more with education and being an educationalist.
Magic?
Sure. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
To give you a couple of sentences of background, I think I started out as an academic. I was interested in psychology of learning, and to me, the question was centered around meta-knowledge. So how do we know that we know something, or how can we say that we can do something effectively, or that we are skilled at something? And you know, that was like a very beginning of a career. I did a PhD on that, and very soon I learned the practical side of academia is a lot of waiting to get published, a lot of waiting for people to read things, a lot of you know, waiting for somebody maybe to implement things a few years down the line, or maybe not having that honor of people actually doing something different because of something you did. So I retreated, I think, and that was the right word. I met Marta a long time ago when she was creating a university-owned consultancy. And I've been working at that university-owned consultancy ever since. So my day job is helping people in organizations think together, right? So that has immediate outcomes. That has plenty of practical impact, maybe too much of it. So the school of thinking for me personally was in a way like a you know, a way to go back to the roots, to the interest, to the curiosity. That was the first you know, thing that brought me to academia, right? To that line of exploration. And, you know, in a sense, in the school of thinking, I have two roles. One is being an instructor, right? My topic is called fallacies and biases. And we simply there's a couple of layers to that theme. One is simply looking at the ways that thinking, you know, kind of goes off track, becomes faulty, becomes erroneous, you know, like how can we go wrong with what we are trying to do? And then very often, you know, like when we are starting to explore that as like a body of knowledge, some additional layers reveal themselves. So one, the critical thinkers on board, they start asking, what is that standard that we're measuring ourselves against, and we are saying the thinking is faulty, says who, right? So like says logic, says probability, you know, mathematics, and so on and so forth. Why is that the measuring stick for the thinking process, right? Why should thinking be shouldn't be thinking be about something else? Something more, you know, personal, for example, right? Why is thinking about being right as logic dictates, and so on? So that's the level of exploration that's interesting. But I think like the even more basic and inspiring one is simply like making this process of thinking a topic, an object, right? So like thinking is something you use to focus on other stuff, right? And then when you make this act the topic of reflection, and you say, okay, this could be wrong or right or whatever, you make an object that you can then look at and play with, and so on and so forth. So that's my ambition in the course I'm teaching, is like simply people standing next to something they perceive as transparent. And my other role in this program is coordinating things. So, you know, like together with Marta, who is one of the founders, or the founder of the program, we're going to help people connect different learning experiences in the program and hopefully, make it as some sort of gestalt, right, and some sort of coherent whole, even though there's a lot of separate learning experiences inside it.
That's fantastic. Gerard, welcome, sir.
Thank you. My role, well, let me first start by saying that I'm part of the international staff in the sense that I'm Dutch, but I live in the UK, so at least I represent 2 countries. It's difficult to well, my role in the course is not managerial, so my only contribution is in essence in a particular field. And I thought it would be nice if I give a little bit background of the type of passion I have for the field that I am in and that I hope to contribute to the course, where I won't give a general lecture, by the way, but will focus on being a kind of support system where I criticize everybody whenever that is possible and suggest new possibilities. So let me start by saying a little bit of where my passion started. I attended a very good school with a lot of topics, including Latin and Greek. But I was particularly intrigued by mathematics, but not mathematics as a discipline as it is usually taught, but by the way mathematicians think. For example, how they use axioms. Of course, one might ask why that particular interest, but that's just the way things go, I think. At the university, I had a lot of mathematics, but there was very little about one has to think to do mathematics. So I was rather dissatisfied. And when I finished my mathematics education, I continued to explore studies to study in statistics, econometrics, and mathematical psychology. This may look like a strange combination, but it was all in the effort to link my education to something concrete. In these areas, it is difficult to avoid traditional researchers, that is, people who adhere to the Cartesian distinction, where one limits oneself to studying what is in the world, independent of one's thinking. And I wanted to escape this, so the only way to do that is to study the value of that distinction and become an expert in research methods. That is the many ways in which individuals are supported who wish to adhere to that Cartesian distinction or wish to explore other approaches. This implies, for example, one has to study and teach to people how to set up experimental situations, build models, and study applications, and also to identify the limitations of research, for example, by one's body, ability to talk, and one's observational skill. I also try to go beyond those, beyond that this Cartesian distinction, and this led me to becoming an expert in research methods and hence a professor in research methods. My first appointment was to help develop how one might support social support via research in an area that is little known because eventually it was taken out of the academic statutes, but it is still there. It is called the field of andragology. It's obviously an area where the Cartesian approach does not help. Anyone who seeks support is interested in that support and has the intention to do something to him or herself to improve something, etc. So one has to include preferences and emotions. Later on, my interest in research methods turned out to be rather attractive. So eventually I became a part-time professor in agriculture, second prize in Mexico, business, architecture, and mathematics. And eventually I was able to achieve the high honor of a place in the School of Thinking, where I focus on research and design. It seems useful to give an explicit example of what I think is an important achievement. It stems from Galileo. To study gravity, he dropped a lead ball in a gutter and noted where the ball was after each second. The correlation between the two types of numbers is now known as the law of gravity. That is a description of the set of observations of place and time. And there is a parameter in that law which is called the gravity constant. Remarkably, he had recognized that the ball rolling down was the same phenomenon as dropping a stone from the Tower of Pisa. To me, that was a real example of good thinking. Later on, I became interested in examples of applying these and similar laws in the real world. In World War II, it proved difficulty to shoot down German planes. Seeing the planes as equivalent to rolling balls didn't help, as piloted planes do not behave like ballistic objects. It implied new limits and new constraints on the shooters. They now had to include the pilot's intentions as part of the shooter's constraints. A number of strategies was developed in an area that I will mention maybe in the course. One such effort was to interact with the pilot, that is, discuss in a metaphorical sense with the pilot. Tell him that your shooting is predictable, and then at a certain moment when he no longer expects it, change. So you make use of the tendency of people to look for patterns. This proved to be a problem, and dealing with it led to a definition of a new field of study. What shooters are able to do, given that they are constrained by escaping pilots rather than by rolling balls. This field is obviously wide. In my view, it includes studies outside the mechanistic world. For example, how one may intensify the feelings of beauty one experiences when looking at flowers, how one may intensify one's experience of paintings, of other people, and of buildings. In this type of view emphasizes that there is not one feeling, but usually a set of feelings that are called qualia. My work in this area, as I mentioned, led to an invitation to join the staff of the School of Thinking. And what I think was interesting, on the basis of a single lecture that Francis Heiligen accidentally attended. So life consists of things you do because the outside world is randomly organized. But our thinking is not randomly organized. It is actually organized around our freedom to act within chosen constraints. So I may choose to constrain myself to draw lines on a flat surface, as in Euclidean geometry, or to add my fingers, or to talk about the fingers in my hand to develop the notion of number theory and algebra. And there are many similar things. So what I'm passionate about in contributing to the school is that all forms of thinking refer to the possibility of being free to do what is not forbidden, or that is allowed given limitations or constraints. I'm passionate to make our students aware of how they may use their freedom to develop their own thinking systematically, not by studying the ways other people have been thinking, but by training themselves, by trying to think within the constraints that they have chosen themselves, not other people. But I also wish to further develop my area by interacting with the students. That is always a selfish aim, but it is something that is extremely useful and pleasant. For example, I'm thinking now of exploring how to go beyond the limitations of baking bread, that is, how to develop the best ways to be a baker, of being a lawyer, or of being in love. A topic that I also wish to explore is climate change, and in particular, becoming an educated and caring person. So my contribution this year is that I hope to be able to demonstrate during the course the value of exploring what can be done within any, I emphasize, any set of given constraints. I want to help people become aware of their constraints as an embodied person as well. You always have to have your own eyes, ears, and feelings, especially feelings and preferences. I want them to help them develop new forms of thinking in relation to their own reality in art, research, and in criticism. So this is where I want to emphasize that my life is a development in terms of a special time of interest, the interest between me and the outside world, between me and the outside world as it presents constraints, between me and the constraints that I present to myself. That would be my idea of contributing to the course.
That's fantastic. And Gerard, you're a very ambitious man, sir. I have to start off with that. And I very much like the distinction you're making there between mechanism and beauty, in particular, and this persistent emphasis on that freedom requires an action that includes constraint. It doesn't exclude constraint, but there is a freedom in establishing certain constraints, let's say. And I like also, Maciek, what you were emphasizing about school of thinking in your life, sort of representing this return to an original curiosity that you had at one point, but was in some sense killed, perhaps by bureaucratic processes, like you mentioned in academia, like waiting around for publications, waiting around for this or that professor to read your work. And the school of thinking being a kind of return to academia, which comes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and if sorry to interrupt, if I may add, maybe there's this dialogue between the theory or thinking or reflection or just exploration without very practical application that's immediate, and this very practical, change
Right.
you want to see in the world, which Gerard also was mentioning, right? So like,
yes.
The question is, yes, you think to kind of have an impact on the world, but if you focus on that impact too much, if you want to have the results yesterday, if you're working for a board of directors who needs the strategy, but they need that strategy without investing any effort in questioning the assumptions they make, that exercise becomes futile. Becomes very similar to the situation when you have thinking without connection to reality at all, right? So that's
right.
This kind of dialectic dynamic that I was trying to refer to.
Yeah, and also in that relationship between the theoretical and the practical, almost like the job you had been doing was, I think you said, was too practical. But that connection between the theoretical and the practical being an important one to cultivate. And then Marta, what stuck out to me from you is that I've always been interested and perhaps never fully wrapped my mind around it, but just this idea of thinking about social processes themselves as subjects of cognition, and that has sort of, led you into an interesting place with the school of thinking and focused on education. And I think there's a lot that perhaps we could discuss there. a little bit for me is that my background here with the School of Thinking, it really comes out of my doctoral training. And my doctoral training was, I think that the easiest and the simplest way to describe my history is a kind of fascination with evolutionary theory, which led me to trying to develop a theory of human evolution in the context of modern technology, and kind of reaching a limit with human predictability. You know, I was always fascinated and always troubled by the fact that in cosmology or physics, we could predict things many millions of years into the future, but that with human evolution and the human society, basically, that our prediction capacity basically just breaks down. And this sort of led me throughout my doctorate to have an interest in dialectical thinking. And so, like, the major transition in my mind, in my intellectual history, was, I think, basically from evolutionary thinking to dialectical thinking. And thankfully enough, towards the end of my doctorate, Marta had started this project, the School of Thinking. And so it in some sense, it became my first home to play around with dialectical thinking in a more professional sense. And I had a lot of actually my first say motivations to develop either courses or papers for about dialectical thinking came as originally motivated from the work at the start of the School of Thinking. At Philosophy Portal now is where most of my work is located. This year we've been teaching Hegel's Science of Logic. We're going to be doing Lacan's Écrit this fall, and we also taught Alenka Zupancic What is Sex. And for my contributions to the School of Thinking this year, I would just basically like to bring in some of these themes that I've been developing at Philosophy Portal. I mean, I think the easiest way to describe it would be, I'm interested in how logic changes from Aristotle to Hegel. I think that this transition, which is to me very clear in the Science of Logic, is basically Hegel saying we have to update from Aristotelian logic. I think a lot of what this amounts to is including a perspective of being which is integrally tied up with nothing. And then also with Lacan's work, basically the focus on the unconscious mind and social unconscious seems to be central. And with Alenka Zupancic's work, it seems to be basically a manifesto about the sexual and the political, and the imminent connection between the sexual and the political. And so with these themes in the background of my mind with Philosophy Portal, I would like to bring these to the table at the School of Thinking. So those are some of the things that are exciting me and interesting me. But some of the questions I have here in regards to what the panel's been talking about, I think starting with Marta, and when I throw out these questions, they're for everyone as well. But just sort of originally piquing my curiosity from what Marta was talking about, is when you say you've been focused on social processes and thinking about social processes as subjects of cognition themselves, what have you learned? And again, for all of you, what have you learned specifically about social processes in acting out the School of Thinking? I mean, I don't know if that question's too broad, but yeah, what comes to your mind?
You are not asking how my thinking about this changed. Meanwhile, you are asking about the social process of the School of Thinking itself.
Well, just have you what have you learned about social? What have you learned about social cognition from acting out the School of Thinking? Yeah,
so I wouldn't say that from acting out the School of Thinking itself, I have learned about, like, it's more like coincidental that like when you are busy and obsessed with a particular observation, for a long time, it kind of like wears off, and I think this happened to me, and I think it's not only specific to me. What seems to me like the most interesting for many people who are busy with theory and philosophy is a particular kind of like a shape of an understanding, or kind of like a gestalt of understanding that has to do with like their own process of like cognitive development. Yes, and then we are attracted to like theoretical frameworks or like like particular ways of thinking and phrasing that kind of like like match this, and we are trying to get out of that. Yes, and once it's done, it's like not interesting anymore. Yes, but until it's done, it's like over and over and over the same like story. Yes, so I think my like if you want to, I don't know if this qualified as a Lacanian analysis or like just analysis, but if I'm to disclose like my process, like why I was obsessed with this, I had years and years of before starting a school thing, actually before moving to Belgium from Poland, that I was becoming more and more proficient at like all sorts of business consultancy and training activities and management and so on. Also doing a PhD in what was called then humanistic management. And like the personal experience of this process of gaining proficiency was that the more and more like coherent and successful was like what was coming out of my mouth, and it was already, like crispy and working and delivering what is supposed to deliver, the more kind of dissociated I was feeling from that. To the extent that like it was like an internal yawn or like eye roll, that I'm like like I'm being like super professional, and it's like oh okay, let's go home, like internally. So this kind of like layering of me and this like very already well developed persona was very strong, and I got curious about like what's going on, like why, like who is speaking, like basically the question I had was like who is speaking, and it's like really coincidental, that I found this particular set of theories and not the other, and during the school of thinking process that you ask about is that I actually discovered there are many different approaches and like paths of like even like theoretical discourse that lead you to a similar kind of like ungluing yourself from this linguistic persona that that you have been training yourself to become. Yes, but for me, like the vocabulary was theory of social systems, and then I was super obsessed with Niklas Luhmann theory, which like to me was, like the theory at the time. And so. So what I was curious about is like who is speaking and who is perceiving when this very coherent and integrated speaker is speaking, and why isn't it me? Like to like kind of like paraphrase it, like who is it? And then like observing others. There would be a different kind of discourse speaking, but they would be like open their mouth and speak as that. Yes, and to the degree that like in my observation, if people were not participating in a social situation knowing as what they are participating, like the kind of ontology, I'm speaking as this represented, like I'm like I'm a systems thinker, and I'm like then I know what to do, what I want, or I'm a manager, or I'm a like accountant. Yes, and I know. But if I lose those parameters of the player I'm supposed to be in this like everything is lost. Yes, so and then during the school of thinking, I believe I've been listening, like I kind of like I loosen up in terms of like what the way of describing this process, because like last year I was reading this gigantic book by Ian McGilchrist, which is called The Matter with Things, which is like almost 3,000 pages, and The Master and His Emissary, which is like a little bit shorter. He's speaking about the same thing in a completely different imagery, metaphors, like so. Yeah, so. I think I've learned to kind of disentangle from my way of describing the disentanglement, if this makes any sense.
If I could ask a follow-up just quickly, is when you say that you were in Luhmann and he was the theory, do you think that when we build a theoretical persona that we all go through a phase of becoming particularly obsessed or attracted to one theory? Like we have the theory to solve things, and then as we develop, we sort of open up a bit more? Do you think that there's some general developmental process that's going on here?
Yeah, it seems so. And kind of like the look I have now at this face is a little bit more psychiatric to put it in this, like kind of like an obsession, yes. And also like what I understood is that like I understood like that it really doesn't make sense to other people, you know, because the signifiers we put on like that like we kind of project onto this theory, it's like doing this thing to our mind, not necessary to others. So we can be like speaking forever, like, yeah. But for other people, like completely different signifiers and metaphors and, you know, like linguistic structures do the trick. Yes. So I think it is a phase, like observing and now being a little bit involved with advising PhD students. I say, okay, you know, like you are in for a few years and like there's no way to like talk you out of it. let's just buckle up and wait. Yeah? So yeah.
Right. Maciek, have you had a similar experience, or what's your experience been getting involved with the School of Thinking and thinking about social processes, educational processes?
Yeah, I think that's like what Marta describes, based on her experience previous to the School of Thinking. I think like there's a part to it or an aspect of it that is also happening in the School of Thinking itself, in the sense that it's an academic postgraduate program. You sign up for it, you become a student, you can join it as an instructor, there's a coordinator, there's a bursar, you know, there's like the whole social game that has defined roles and rules of operation, and like, you know, people come in knowing how to play it. It's not the first rodeo, right? They know that the gray-haired guy is the professor. They're supposed to listen to him or her and, you know, nod along and write down stuff and, you know, comment in an intellectual way and so on and so forth. And like the playful part of the School of Thinking is that we are definitely doing that. Like we are doing that. It's like a socially constructed situation that has that quality, that has that set of constraints to like follow up on Gerard's perspective. And then it's also trying to kind of play with that, to break out of it, you know, sometimes provoke people, you know, to challenge that part of, you know, and so you're constantly coming into two versions of yourself. One is this very professional instructor that has a workshop prepared and has to deliver it professionally, as Marta is, you know, like, and get good evaluation results at the end, and people recommending it to the next batch of students and so on and so forth. Like, this is what a good program delivers, right? And then people coming in that mode of operation, they're asking, okay, what are the learning outcomes of this program? What is this going to help me with? Why is this course in this set of, you know, other courses? How are we supposed to implement the results of what Gerard has taught us, and so on and so forth? And we are trying to be good service providers and do that. And at the same time, we're constantly asking people to kind of like see that as a game that is only useful if you like it this way, that you should not be a pawn of this process, right? Or it's a dance, like those court dances in like late Renaissance, like everybody that has very strictly defined steps. And, you know, like, we're asking people to maybe find some room for improvisation inside that very, very highly defined script, right? And I think that's like the risky part of the School of Thinking, because then you say or do or something that people are not expecting and frustrates them, or you know, makes them ask questions. You know, are you crazy, or what was the point? What was the purpose of this particular PowerPoint slide, or whatever else he suggests to people, right? And then people also enjoy that, right? They kind of at least the recent year, I remember the Delta year, was very much focused around that dynamic, okay, like being very structured, organized, predictable, playing the game, and then allowing oneself to kind of not know what's going to happen next, or, you know, making things more open-ended and unpredictable. And to many people, that was not only like an intellectual process, but also a very emotional and social one.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, from both what you're saying and what some of what Marta was saying, and just knowing a little bit about the background of the course, I mean, it seems to me like the school of thinking is inviting people who might feel stuck in a box, maybe stuck in constraints, to reference what Gerard was talking about, maybe stuck in constraints that were not of their own choosing. And school of thinking can perhaps introduce different ways of seeing different boxes, breaking out of boxes, and maybe even cultivating a new relationship to constraints. Gerard, I'd be interested to know, in your history of teaching, in your history of working in research and research experiment, do you see a difference in what the school of thinking's doing in comparison to some other programs you might have taught at or be involved in regards to cultivating the self relationship to freedom, knowledge, constraints?
Yes, it's an interesting issue. In one of my activities was to be the director of the PhD program in the University of Lincoln, and the obvious lesson that you could draw is that about 80% of the students I had, more than 100, was interested in getting a diploma, as you mentioned before. But 20% was willing to be a real researcher, which is to let go of all assumptions and open up and read this and that. You know, at one time I told a student to read something in, what was it? Well, it doesn't matter, in agriculture, a student in business. And he mentioned that to his boss. And that boss says, but why would you read something in agriculture when you are in business? So that attitude is, of course, a major problem that I think that I interpreted the school of thinking to be willing to handle from the beginning. The fact that people are fixated in certain constraints, think that certain authors are, you know, geniuses and therefore good, whereas the 20% were willing to take my word that any genius is an idiot in a field that is not his own. Only where he is good at is he to be listened to. And all these 20 people all wrote PhDs that were really outside of the mainstream. So sometimes it was a difficulty, for example, in architecture. Sometimes it was a difficulty to get the examiners to approve it. But all of them were actually, in the end, considered to be at the cum laude level. Although here in the UK, we don't give cum laude, so it disappeared. But that would be one of the answers to your point. What is it that I think that I might help create? It is a certain flexibility in people's thinking. You know, if somebody says the world is sphere, you might say, no, it is a flat space. And then be able to argue it, not in terms of giving an alternative theory. So in the way I have explained my interpretation of research is precisely that in the area of social science, you can't even develop theories. So the theories are out. It's just simply not possible. You can develop theories about temporary patterns, but then, of course, as soon as somebody comes along and says, no, that's not the case, I do something different, the whole theory goes out of the window. So what I think that I get out in the conversations, that again, among the students, there are people who actually are willing to become flexible. And there are people who aren't willing to become flexible. In the first year, Luc de Proost and Dirk van Helder were, for example, two students who demonstrated that they could actually switch constraints and start to think in a different way. And I think that was a wonderful experience. So I would guess that my experience with the PhD students has to be repeated in this experience with our students in the meeting. But at the same time, if we can extend that percentage, 20% into, let us say, 70%, I would be extremely happy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I like this idea that, well, I mean, what I was thinking is when you said any genius is an idiot in a field that is not his own. I mean, the first thing I thought was maybe, the existence of polymaths or people who are maybe even trained from the school of thinking to be multidisciplinary, giving them a certain flexibility, like you were saying, between different fields. But also, of course, yeah, people can't be an expert in every field. And then there's
I mentioned that I have been a professor, well, actually in 8 different fields, but I don't consider myself a genius. I consider myself flexible. So problems in architecture, I could translate into other problems, etc., etc. So flexibility, to my mind, is what's really needed.
Right. Okay. Well, this distinction then between flexibility and rigidity, as it regards to education, let's say, when it comes to my mind thinking about the educational process producing rigid people or rigid minds, the first metaphor that comes to my mind is thinking about the educational process as like an industrial process, where I still remember being in grade 2 and being forced to sit in a chair, right? Like, and being wanting to run around, right? But I'm being forced to sit in a chair in grade 2, and what bodily effect did that have on my mind? So we train kids to be rigid, to don't be 5 minutes late. All of the classes are at a certain time. We design these structures, and in some sense, of course, these structures are necessary. But in what sense is, and this is a question for all of you, in what sense is the educational challenges of our time going through a transition from, let's say, implicitly industrial modes of educating people into certain rigid categories, to needing a more flexible, dynamic subject? What do you think's going on here? I'll maybe start with Marta and then go in the same order.
You could put it in terms of, like this is an assembly line and so on and so on. This way of thinking about education. But when you say rigid relationship with any system of knowledge or any description, to me, that sounds primarily as a psychological process of like where your safety in the world is coming from, and because if I don't know, like if the psychologist Maciek will agree, but it's kind of like like how your personality or mind or like psyche is constructed. Yes, where like what is like. So I would put it really in the years 0 to 3 in terms of education, and then like if you raise anxious people, they need to get safety from something. Yes. So irrespective if you will like be teaching rigid understandings of fluffy understandings or whatever like structures of understandings, if there is nothing like underneath that like provides safety, the whatever composition of understanding will become an object of attachment and identity that like you need to glue yourself to. Yeah. And then even a most rigid educational system, if this is not the case, if you are like, you know, relaxed, flexible, and kind of like feeling that you belong to this universe just so, you know, no matter what you say and what you think, even the most rigid and oppressive educational system will not make a rigid person out of you, will make a rebel out of you, I would say. Yeah. So it's a little bit more, you know, like in terms of this rigidity. And then yes, if you take this as a like first opening, yes, you have people who like need the safety on a symbolic level, or really don't really need that safety on a symbolic level, and they enter the, let's say, a rigid trajectory of a 21st century assembly line education. So half of them who are like really like, you know, have their security like from a more, you know, like a different level of existence, they just hate it. They just simply hate it. Yes? And the other ones become like, you know, like fascistic believers in whatever order you are you are implementing. So this is one possibility. Another possibility, if you have a kind of flexible, not rigid, you know, open-ended educational environment, you have to provide more like a psychological intervention into like those deeper level of like belonging and safety. If you like, if those people are supposed not to, you know, like attach themselves even to whatever, like, you know, like on a descriptive level, whatever you will have, you may have this educational discourse which is like very democratic and very open-ended and very pluralistic and so on. Yes? And then when people need to derive safety from the scripture, they will derive it from there. Yeah, and they will be rigid believers in fluffiness, like to put it to put it kind of in a caricaturish way. So it has to, like, in terms of rigidity, the educational system has to like become a psychological intervention as well, if you don't want to have rigidity as an outcome, irrespective of the structure of the discourse.
Do you think, just to follow up there, because I like this emphasis on psychological safety and, like, for example, you know, having a certain symbolic rigidity when you don't feel like your underlying, say, biosemiotic system has a certain safety, like, what steps as an educational program or universities can we take? I've heard some people say, you know, should we have, you know, free therapy for graduate students, for example? You know, there's a mental health crisis on campus, for example. You know, do we need to rethink the political economic dimensions of education? In terms of the way in which academics are often in quite fierce competition for positions, for safety, and that this could impact, for example, the way in which people either, you know, structure ideological alliances or, you know, structure their careers, basically.
All of that, you know, and yeah, like therapy and so on, like that. For me, my favorite therapeutic scheme would be the universal basic income for all, forever. You know? But yeah, we can, if not that, then yeah, then therapy.
Right. No, I think no, I you know, I do think UBI. I mean, I don't, obviously, who knows if UBI would work, but thinking about, like, I think what people are, at least my resonance with the idea is, I think what people are looking for with UBI is basically a new social contract and a new layer of agreements where we sort of have a sense of a shared safety net, back to this idea of psychological safety. And then if there is a sort of new shared safety net, then the question is, then that, to me, it gets really interesting question is, well, what types of creative organizations are possible given a new layer of psychological safety? Yeah, that's, we'll see what the future holds, but who knows what the hell's gonna who knows what's gonna happen on that front. Magic, what are some of your ideas here about some of the themes here that Marta was talking about related to education, safety, rigidity, flexibility?
Yeah, I very much echo what I have taken from Marta's perspective, that it's like a false dilemma, or it's a too simplistic dilemma to say, okay, there's this industrialized, competitive, over-structured, over-disciplined education system that turns people into like drones or whatever you say, and then on the other side there's this fantasy of Rousseauian, like a commune of everybody being free and loving each other and having no obstacles or no oppression or no pressure whatsoever. If you paint that distinction, it's very hard to choose which world you want to live in, because one is a fascist regime, and the other one is just like a fantasy of a paradise when every need is automatically met and there's no challenges, there's no struggle, there's no effort, right? And I think like one basic thing about human existence is that people need a game worth playing, and getting great, getting better at something, learning something is a nice variety, nice kind of a game, right? So like what Marta calls a psychological intervention here, education as psychological intervention, means to me it's like a game design problem. How do we design a learning situation that is challenging enough for people to also find it worth engaging, playing, struggling, competing, whatever, not necessarily in an oppressive way, right? So that's my angle. It's like it's not enough to remove the obstacles and external pressure. It would be nice, but then the question is, how do we find the energy to invest in getting good at something? Right, when you also always have the choice of watching another Netflix special, you always have the choice of another instant gratification of your choice, right? If you have UBI and you just do that, and
sounds a little bit like the UBI for the last man.
Say again. Sorry. I'm not sure if I got
UBI, universal basic income for the last man of just comforts and isolation from any struggle or challenge.
Okay, yeah. So that's an interesting. So a safety net, definitely, right? But then as some sort of invitation to explore and discover and and challenge yourself, and so there has to be some sort of push or pull or whatever present in the environment. It's not always like 100% organic and autonomous and internal, I think.
No, that seems clear. I have a follow-up question for you, because you were emphasizing that in the school of thinking, you encourage the students to see all of these interventions as kind of like a game, a game-like structure, and at the same time, in your last response, you were saying, people need a game worth playing. And so my question there is, what does it mean in your view to find a game worth playing? What does that look like, and what does that mean to you?
That's a really interesting question. I don't have a ready-made answer for that, I'm afraid. One part of it might be what Marta mentioned, is like you have to have a game that you haven't played before, in a sense, right? That there's this balance of being totally confused and thrown into some chaos that has no rules and therefore no ways of getting better at it, no patterns that you can learn to recognize and follow and master, and so on and so forth. So there has to be that aspect of kind of control or impact or influence. That you have some skill of influencing the game and making yourself score points, right? So that's one aspect. And when it becomes mechanistic and effortless, it stops being interesting, right? So like I dropped the name of an author, but it will come to me later. But like the definition of a game is like striving toward a goal, overcoming self-imposed constraints. Right, so there has to be some sort of limitation that you're overcoming. Otherwise, it would not be a game. Right, so that's the sweet spot here, like finding this point of equilibrium when you're challenged, but it's still possible for you to have an impact or have your efforts translate into some sort of results.
Right, I'm getting some funny images. There's some popular YouTube videos where they have ordinary people go up against professional athletes in the game that the professional athlete plays, and just watching the regular people get destroyed by the professional athlete again and again and again. It's just,
I think it's not exactly fun for the regular person, right?
Right, but it's fun for the viewer on YouTube. You get some perverse enjoyment on the other side. But it seems to be like there needs to be some, say, dialectical relationship between mechanism and beauty. Something that you find attractive, something that you find pulled towards, but at the same time, you don't want to be so overwhelmed by the beauty that you can't perform, or you can't dance, so to speak. Within that, anyway,
yeah, but I think like the other part, I'm not sure I would use the mechanism. But the nice duo for me would be beauty and power.
Okay. The reason I was thinking mechanism was I was thinking because like if you're in whatever it is, if it's sports or if it's academics, I mean there is some sort of like if you're a baseball player, you need to know how to swing the bat, which would be a mechanism, right? Like or you need to know how to shoot the ball, which would be a mechanism. You got to repeat that mechanism, but you also have to do it in a sort of a free flowing, spontaneous way in the game setting. Anyway, but I think all of this does point to an interesting question for Gerard, because again, this relationship between freedom and constraints, and the idea of finding a game in life that's worth playing. What comes to your mind, Gerard?
Well, a number of things actually. One of the things that talking about rigidity. Sometimes you meet people who believe in the Christian God, and they have a tendency to talk to you and to convince you that you should believe in it as well. There is also another example of the same kind. Some judges impose the maximum punishment on criminals, and others take a lot of elements into consideration and say, but it is the first time, and etc. So that to me is an extremely understandable and important aspect of this notion of rigidity. What I told my faculty when I was their dean, you have to adhere to the rules, precisely, no deviation possible, except when a deviation is possible. So generosity is defined by the fact that you can deviate from the strict rule. So to my mind, generosity is another word for flexibility. And I still remember I was teaching as a student. I was 19. I was teaching schoolgirls in a school for girls, mathematics, and they were 12 to 13-year-olds. I had also older students, but this was important to me because they were open to mathematics, no problem at all. even though they were girls, they of course expressed the notion that mathematics is not for girls. But then, just as Maciek is saying, I made mathematics into a game, and everybody started to participate. And at the end of the year, everybody was had a high number judgment at the end. And the school director said, it's not possible. But it was possible because they took it as a game. They didn't say to themselves, I am a girl, therefore no mathematics. They just listened to me and I said, you are a girl, therefore mathematics, and so on and so on. So I think this notion of generosity is something that I would really like to support in a teaching situation. The more flexible you are, the better you can empathize with the other person. The more you understand that what you do is has an effect on the other person, the better you are actually able to think. So to my mind, a school of thinking should generate that kind of attitude. You know, of course, you have to obey the rules, the law, but not when it's not necessary.
It seems to me like we could do a little school of thinking experiment right here in this podcast by what I want to, and I've already seen some aspects come out from all of you is, you know, the opposite of we could play with the opposites of rigidity and flexibility. And, you know, in certain circumstances, in certain contexts, I can easily see why flexibility would be a virtue or flexibility would be a good thing. But I can also imagine situations where rigidity is a good thing or rigidity is a virtue, right? Like, you know, I'm because it's just coming to my mind. I'm thinking about, imagine in an intimate relationship, right? If I'm standing by my partner, I'm rigidly standing by my partner. I'm saying I'm gonna be, say if I say to my partner, I'm going to be with you through thick and thin. I'm going to be with you through the hard times and the good times and the hard times. I'm standing right here. I'm not going to be like a blowing around here and there. Whereas if I'm flexible, I might say, well, I'm with you today. I'm going to be with someone else tomorrow. Right. You know, and you've got to be flexible to me moving around like this. Right. Like that, you know, so I just wanted to see if we could play a little bit with, and also like playing also with like, you know, constraints, boundaries, blowing apart boundaries, establishing new boundaries. Right. You know, what's to be said for example, attachment, fixity, becoming, you know, like, you know, let's say taking a stand on a certain thinker or taking a stand on a certain theoretical position. I mean, this is a genuine question. I mean, how should we be thinking about this? Maybe I'll start with Marta.
Yeah, so this is an interesting example because for me, like this dichotomy of flexibility and rigidity that we spoke about actually like doesn't apply at all to those dimensions, you know, because like it's something different, you know, the ability to like, you know, think in a this way and another, yes, the ability to follow an argument, the ability to read a book and understand. For me, it's like one thing completely different from, you know, like your free choice of like the way you will you know, do it, yes, and actually and this flexibility is required for the choice to be free, okay. So, and then your commitments, you know, your choices, your aesthetics, you're saying, okay, this theory over this theory, you know, it's like it has value, you know, it has true value. It's not a like entrapment of your mind that you would like, you know, you are just not able to be out of a particular configuration. You are able, you know, and you can think this way, this way, this way, this way, and then what you do, you know, like I wouldn't apply, the description of mental or psychological flexibility to the person who, like you cannot depend on, like, well, it's a different thing, yes. And yeah, so like, you have the flexibility for freedom, yes, and to be a serious person, like somebody, like a good friend, a good partner, a good thinker, yes. You are able to be disciplined, yes, and it's a different thing altogether in my mind, yes, which actually, for somebody to be a good partner of any interaction, I want to see, yeah, and all sorts of like dimensions. Also, for example, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, this doctoral training of being like learning to be a scientist. A person who is not able to think logically, in the name of flexibility, is the most horrible entity, like it's really horrible. You need this, you need discipline, you need but like, to me, it's not rigidity. It's kind of like an ability to make choices in a coherent way, free choices out of possibilities, and to know where you stand and why you choose the next step. It's not that, like self-organizing process of a particular pattern that you are caught in leads you, yes, which would be this, like attachment-based doing, because people who are attached to a particular worldview those worldviews are not consistent, they are not coherent, yes. There's a kind of like, there are so many like internal contradictions that you just, like you say this and you would say this because this pattern goes like that, yeah. So it's not necessarily like logically coherent, but I don't know if it makes any sense, but like just want to say that to me, one and the other are two different things.
Right on. What about you, Maciek?
Yeah, well, that brought up a memory, what you said. One of my early formative experiences of, interacting with academia is that when I was like taking some sort of quiz or an exam as maybe like a 18-year-old, and there was one question that has an obvious mistake inside it, like obvious logical fallacy, embedded in the question, and that it was impossible to answer it correctly. So I was like, sorry, like, I think this one's wrong, that it cannot be like this, and this at the same time. And the teacher said, well, if you're that's because you're using classical Aristotelian logic, right? Just like use that sort of, there are many logics and so on and so forth to kind of, like make me shut up, right? And I thought like, okay, this is not fair intellectually, socially, it's just not okay, right? So what you're describing is, I think, that, like, flexibility, if you're using that as a justification for saying, well, anything goes. I can, say whatever, and it has the same validity as, something that has some internal consistency and discipline and so on and so forth. Like that's the like a first year student of philosophy learning about postmodernism, and then going to a party to impress some people. That's the same level of maturity and the same level of added value to the conversation. So like very very strongly against that, not even on intellectual grounds, but like moral grounds. Like if you say, if you treat flexibility in thinking that way, you're really breaking something much more interesting and sophisticated.
Gerard, what do you think about the possibility of seeing flexibility and rigidity, just as an example, just as a thought experiment, as both having a virtuous dimension or a positive and a negative side? What do you think about that?
Well, in the Red Book by Carl Jung, it's an interesting record of his dreams. And one of the sentences is that life is in between left and right, good and evil, And I think that is one of the important things. You cannot say it must be flexible. You can't say it must be rigid. Life is in between. And that's why how I translated it, in fact, by saying you must always adhere to the rules, but you must always be generous and accept that there are exceptions, that things are changing, etc. So you must support the in-between. In that sense, I would like to make a comment on one of your, it's not a criticism, but it's maybe a misunderstanding. I am not advocating this general discussion in system thinking where it is said, you know, there is a boundary problem, you have to change the boundary. No, I'm saying the exact opposite. I'm saying you have to choose a boundary and then to become competent within the boundary. So I emphasize precisely the opposite of the freedom of changing the boundary. Once you have chosen one boundary, you must be exercise your freedom within the boundary. Once you have done that, you can then change the boundary. But you cannot just change the boundary because that will lead precisely to the freedom that Maciek was talking about.
I love that example. That's really well said. And when I think about some of the most important decisions of my life, I think your approach there with systems thinking is the one that resonates the most strongly with me. That is, once you've chosen a boundary, you have to have a certain commitment to that boundary and just explore what it is your freedom within that boundary, as opposed to just jumping from boundary to boundary to boundary to boundary. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
By the way, just as a
yeah, go ahead.
This means that I criticize nearly 90% of system thinkers. Only 10% is actually aware of the difficulty.
Well, we're gonna have to put a warning on the YouTube. We're gonna have to put a warning on the YouTube video, because once I put this out and the systems theory community gets a hold of this information, that I might be getting some negative reviews and feedback there. So
No way, but you can cut it out as well.
No, I'm joking. I think we'll be fine.
I think everybody will believe that the 10% is exactly that, you know.
Fantastic. So
while we are but both, maybe say something, you know, offensive about Taylor Swift or somebody. Do you get more views that way?
Right. Yeah,
not the systems thinking community.
Right. Yeah. No, Taylor Swift gets more views on YouTube than the systems thinking community, unfortunately. But that's the world. That's the world. It's the world we're living in. I'd be interested to go to a theme that, at least, you know, correct me if I interpreted this wrong or right, Maciek, when you were opening about, you know, just that process of doing a doctorate, you know, getting caught up in the games of you know, waiting for people to review your article or whatever, then doing something practical, and then finding the school of thinking as an outlet for a renewed curiosity is, of course, when it comes to the world, when it comes to thinking about pragmatic dimensions of life, money, power, you know, all of the social aspects of our life that we need to monitor, how can we keep that? And this is sort of a question inspired by maybe potential future students interested in joining the school, is how can we keep that curiosity alive? How can we keep that intellectual fire alive throughout our entire lives? You know, as opposed to, you know, I think a lot of people have the experience of being really motivated, curious, you know, passionate in their teenage years or when they're a young thinker. But then, you know, the pragmatics of life take over, you know, both within the school of thinking and perhaps outside of the school of thinking. How can we keep that curiosity alive? And I'll just, anyone who wants to answer that can go for it.
One of the nice questions.
You have to buy you have to win a lottery, or, like, you know, inherit a few nice mansions, you know, rent them out, live off, and then you are free to think. No, like, seriously, this is why it's not random. This is why I mentioned universal basic income in the context of freedom of thinking. I believe that, that there is always, if you are using your mind to ensure your survival, which like maybe a definition of work, yes, intellectual work, there is already like a bias of what is possible as an outcome of your thinking, as an outcome of like which has to do exactly with the how the money travels, yes. And if you are able to like establish yourself at like cash flow trajectory such that what you want to work with your mind on doesn't like interfere with that, fine, yes. But like to me it feels that it's like always like again, like there are boundaries of unthinkable, untalkable, unconceivable, only because of your like the biological substrate needing the particular cash flow in a particular like design, yes. And you can call it a constraint, yes, and it is a constraint, but I don't like it, so I don't know if it answers any.
Could we? I think following. I know when I was in the doctorate. I know when I was in my doctorate, there was about a year and a half where I basically become obsessed with Marxism. And it was on the basis of thinking about class conflict. It was on the basis of thinking about, almost capitalist overdetermination of our lives. And that this is, oftentimes when, to reference Gerard's work on, not setting, basically not experiments, but how do you set up experiments? How do you set up research projects? I think oftentimes the university system leaves out of the equation the political, economic, capitalist machinery, which is going into setting up a certain experiment in the first place. How should we, in your mind, staying away from any ideological capture by, let's say, a Marxist system or something like that, or a Marxist way of thinking, how can we think through these things as scientists or as philosophers? Basically bringing in the political and the economic into our thinking.
Maybe like if you allow me to take a step back, like to the previous question you've asked, because there's a small clarification I'd like to make. I love my corporate clients. I like my day job a lot, and not for I'm not just stating that for marketing purposes, but the reason I like working with them is that type of work presents you with a set of very practical problems that demand immediate solution, right? And that's very stimulating intellectually. It's like the example that Gerard mentioned earlier with the ground-to-air artillery needing to incorporate the decisions of pilots of the bombers, right? And what a great stimulus for thinking, right? How do we, adapt our methods to make more, enemy planes fall down, right? It's a very, a bit of a macabre example, but like very clear in presenting the immediacy of a problem that gets created this way, right? So that type of like interaction with the social economic system, you need to find a way for this company to survive. You need to find a way to help these people get along together. You need to find a way for that group of people to design a product that is going to sell, whatever, right? So that's that type of problems, the quality of impact on survival. I think it creates one of the aspects of the game worth playing that you've been mentioning earlier. Right? So that's one aspect. The problem with that type of work, though, is the lack of time to really sit back and think. Right, so like not in many occasions you have the support, the political support, the social support to say, okay, yeah, give me a bag of money, I'm going to come back to you with a solution, or I'm going to work out a solution, with you. It's going to happen in 6 months' time or in 2 years, right? Like when you read about Enigma or any stuff like that, this took months and this cost lives, not only money, right? So that type of investment is very hard to obtain, and which links us to what Marta said before, like universal basic income, plenty of olives and nice sun in Greece for the philosophers to sit around and ponder things, right? So in a way, School of Thinking is, like, for me, the personal experience of joining VUB and School of Thinking after that period of working for organizations was like, so these people get paid to sit around and think and talk in cafes, right? This is a social situation, a social system that allows people to sit and think without producing anything today. They will produce an article, eventually, hopefully, but who knows, But there's like this pressure to deliver immediate results is removed for the sake of long-term results, hopefully, right? And I think, like, going back to your question now, and to also the socioeconomic political question is how can we still have practical problems to solve and challenges to face without that pressure to deliver now or yesterday, right? Because that is killing the possibility to think.
I would be interested, because I think you were making some funny faces there, Marta, when Maciek was talking. What was coming to your mind on some of those points?
Like we are living in a universe in which there are planets made entirely of diamond. Okay, and why the hell is this planet not able to get out of this slavery of this having to prove the value in order to survive, like your own, but the value of your existence by delivering results? Like, it's really, like, can't we really think ourselves out of this predicament? I'm really annoyed, and then he's justifying that yes, but it makes you think and it makes you flexible, and it motivates you to but we could motivate ourselves by something different. So I kind of I really don't like it. That's my fight. Yeah.
Just reducing basically motivation to a capitalist incentive, or reducing motivation to
the survival imperative. Yes.
Yes.
We haven't checked what happens beyond this stupid level of existence.
Well, we need I think
as a species, and I want to go there. Yes, but in order for humanity to go there, it has to be a global thing, because if it's not a global thing, a universal thing, then it will be bounded by the belonging to a particular logic, which creates a discord. You have to defend, borders, not borders, boundaries, and so on. So yeah,
maybe we need to go from
to the next stage.
Clarification for future scholars, for future historians who are definitely going to analyze this discussion later on.
Yeah.
The motivation to play or the challenge doesn't have to be and should not be about survival. That's the ethical, I think that's the ethical goal that humanity has now, right? Like, make surviving the obvious thing and not something you have to fight for. And then you still need challenges, right? You still need games. You still need to, entertain yourself somehow, right? Once your survival is obvious and unquestionable to a point, I'm afraid.
I think then the question what you need is actually open, and maybe you do need challenges. Maybe I don't, So it would be nice to check for ourselves who needs what.
Yeah. So knowing you, I'm afraid you do.
All right, so Gerard, what's
possibility? Can I?
Yeah, Gerard. Yeah, I was just gonna ask what's coming to your mind now.
Well, one of the things, of course, I mean, I can completely understand what Maciek and Marta is saying, and they are right. But there are some interesting, at least to my mind, paradoxes. For example, if you look at the discussion on climate change, what you hear is that there are two parties. One are the researchers and the others are the politicians. And it is claimed continuously in the literature and in the books that the researchers must be right, that the data they provide and the interpretations they provide must be correct. And after they are correct, the politicians can make a decision. But that's, in a sense, allowing the politicians not to be part of the problem. They are free, but the scientists are not free. They must provide and produce the correct theories. But the major problem, of course, is not that particular kind of problem. So there is the need to introduce, to pull in the politicians into the problem. And the problem is the following. Suppose the climate models are correct, then you have to do something because you want to save the world from, well, for example, in many countries will be submerged, flooded. So the question actually is much different. What is it that politicians and scientists must do in order to reduce the number of deaths? So the political decision is, if you assume that the models are incorrect, then you still have the possibility that they might be correct, and therefore you must save 2 billion people. So whatever the scientists say, there is still the political responsibility of saving 2 billion people. And I think, unfortunately, the politicians are scot-free. Their role is not considered. It is all put onto the responsibilities put on the scientists, but that is not the case. The problem is, are we going to lose 2 billion people? And in that sense, I would like to point out that I think one of the things, and I think Marta or Maciek mentioned it, one of the important possibilities is to ask questions. To say, you know, you are saying that, but is there something else, and can we do something else, etc. Now, I think that as far as I talk to the students, the experience is that most of the students actually come to the course because they are bored with a certain aspect of their daily life. They want to be asked questions. And one of the students, for example, wasn't interested at all in logic or in game theory or system theory. He said, I want some suggestions to develop my personality. And that's an interesting thing. He brought, to my mind, the political into the situation. He said, it's not about theories, it is about the interaction with questions. What I found, for example, very interesting, Richard Feynman once said, you know, I like to go to conferences, but I never listen to the speakers. What I listen to is to what people are saying, because they often suggest new ideas to me. So I come home and I've solved 12 problems. And I think that's a very important aspect of our course. We mustn't teach things, we must teach how to deal with things, which is the political aspect.
Well, that was beautiful, Gerard, and I think that example with Feynman was a particularly powerful example of the way in which I think Feynman was using the social unconscious of in that sense the academic conference to learn about a new problem or see something from a new perspective. And I also really like the way you're articulating the relationship between science and politics in the context of climate change, in particular, because I think it represents the way in which, let's say, in a certain political horizon of our contemporary world, there's a way in which we are depoliticized subjects. and politics is always abstracted or extracted away from the real. So I think we should bring politics back to the real, and we should bring politics back to science, and perhaps back to the school of thinking. So in the way you were articulating. So on that note, maybe it would be interesting for us to talk a little bit about what a prospective student, what the students who are already enrolled in the School of Thinking might expect to encounter this year. What does the School of Thinking, what is the structure, the schedule look like? What are some of the topics that are going to be explored, and maybe your own involvement in that unfolding? Let's say we'll start with Marta and then go on.
I suggest that Maciek knows it all.
You want to go, Maciek?
Yeah, sure. Why not? It's like what we are trying to do differently this year is to have a more clear distinction between what we call planned days and what we call explore days, which is, like the idea of some of the learning in the School of Thinking is learning the language to talk about thinking and to think about thinking, right? To learn the concepts, the theories, so there are some traditional lectures, some like some people sharing their ideas, right? So that's the planned day. So basically a person coming in and telling their story of an exploration of a certain aspect, of what is important to thinking. So there's going to be a lecture on the brain. There's going to be a part on complexity theory. There's going to be a part on cognitive sciences and so on and so forth. Then the other part is the explore days. So basically a fancy name for a workshop where we are trying to take some of those intellectual inspirations, but do what Gerard just mentioned. So use that as a way of asking people questions and inviting them to some sort of learning experiences and to interact in a more unpredictable way. Right? So there's a class that I like, although it's it's an experiment every time. It's called Extended Mind, I think. Yeah, and that is co-designed by a group of, like, there's an academic and there's an artist. There are two artists who are specializing in like these co-creative processes of people becoming, where people are becoming just parts of a thinking machine, or a machine that is producing art or any sort of intellectual output. And it's basically an artsy experiment that we are doing for the whole day, right? So that's the kind of mode of operation when you are trying to think together using some tools provided by the instructor, rather than learn the content or learn the things. And then the third aspect that I've really learned to appreciate last year, actually, is the individual process of doing something we call the portfolio projects, which are basically 3 personal tasks that people do and get support from instructors in one-on-one consultations, and then they may choose to just leave it for themselves or to share it with the rest of the group, and then there's all sorts of interactions based on that. And those projects are inspired by the content of the program, but they are prepared in relationship to whatever is interesting to this student, right? So we have like a self-observation task, which is involves a lot of journaling about one's own thinking process. We have a social political intervention task in which a person chooses a part of their social or professional reality and interacts with people to improve the thinking that happens somewhere, And then there's a creative writing task that Marta is going to tell you maybe more about if she finds it useful, which is trying to speculate about the parts that make up your mind, right? So this psychological idea of subpersonalities, of us having a certain bits of our mind that can act as separate entities and take over from time to time. The exploration that we invite people to is about, having a dialogue between those versions of you, or those aspects of you. And the reason I'm mentioning that in more detail is that I think for the last group at least, it was one of the key experiences that made the whole process that much more interesting. Like, people really went into a very intimate personal exploration from time to time. And those who decided to share it had a quite of a journey. And that was really like a very experiential comment to this idea of making this process more about a person than about a bunch of concepts brought together.
Marta, did you want to go into the creative writing aspect of the course a little bit? Are you in charge of that, or?
Yes, I'm involved in those all of those portfolios. Most of them, this one, also providing individual consultations and so on. What I want to say is, like, to me, the school of thinking without those individual processes wouldn't make sense at all. In the sense that, like, you can have discourse about whatever, like whatever there is, and it might happen to be about thinking, but like if you like, like of course we named the whole thing in a very funny way, the school of thinking. Which, you can object, like, what I mean, but the thing is that thinking is happening all along in like it's continuously happening in the participant's mind, through the participant mind, and if the program would not allow people to research the phenomenon, like to get in contact with the phenomenon itself, like kind of like a field trip, yes, if you will, or like experiential learning, or like really, like not theory, but practice, like this practice in terms, like in the context of the school, which has to do with the mind and thinking and cognition. It has to be like getting in touch with the processes we are speaking about, which is happening, like while you are participating in situations, like while you are thinking about yourself, where you are like living. Yes. So what we do in those individual tasks, it's a set of tasks in which you have to investigate. This is an it's epistemic, but this empirical research. Yes, in the field itself, which is your mind. Yes, and in my understanding, all other classes are providing you with new vocabulary, new way of framing what you might like experience there, or observe there, or interact with, because we have a set of notions by which we can understand the mind, and if you expand the set of notions, or how those notions can be rearranged, you can observe different phenomena or come in touch with different phenomena. But without this coming in touch, no research happens. Yes, with relative to the phenomenon that you are interested in. And that's each of those portfolio tasks has a different angle to this empirical experience. The creative writing one has to do with kind of like externalizing somehow the mind processes that like are normally happening without like linguistic forms, or not that much linguistic form in your own thinking, and this is an invitation to try to structure them as conversations, which I think like is one of the most powerful ways of understanding thinking processes in general, at least to me, that when you think something, yes, it often is a conversation. Yes, it's often is a, you know, like a response. You could say it always is. I don't know if it always is, but it often is. So the creative writing task is to, like, okay, cast it on a stage, make personas out of all those interacting entities in your mind, and, you know, like write a play. And that's it.
Right, fantastic. So you get a pretty good overview there for anyone who might be interested in checking out the School of Thinking. You get an overview there that it's not just a focus on content. It's a focus on a lot on the form, experimenting with the form of thinking, and including the subject, including your own thinking, including the content of your own mind, and really having a program which is unique in facilitating that process. I think, you know, one of the easiest ways to say it would be if you're doing a doctorate in mathematics, or if you're doing a doctorate in philosophy, or if you're doing a doctorate in biology. I mean, your task is to use your thinking for that object. But here we're turning that back on thought itself, which I think, Gerard, you brought up that Maciek, did you want to say something before?
Yeah, I did want to mention something else that we want to try this year, which is the process of forming questions together. Right. So when we started playing this game called School of Thinking, we realized that, you know, like there were some activities, like, you know, we were sending out the reading materials before, and then we're asking the students to ask questions about the materials so that the instructor can prepare and focus on whatever people want to focus on, and so on and so forth. And what we've learned is that the process of asking questions about the material is it's not obvious. Right, it's a skill in itself, like trying to get curious about something and figure out what are the questions you're interested in. You know, the people who come for School of Thinking are not your average, you know, daily consumers, right? Those are people who are inherently, you know, like statistically speaking, more curious on average than the regular person, however you might imagine that person. And still, the task of, okay, so what questions do you have? What would you like to, you know, talk to the instructor about? That was not an easy thing to get out of people, right? And so what we are trying to do this year is we are going to have a special panel. Gerard is one of the professors on the panel, called Thinking Better. And the process is going to be that each time we meet for a session, we have like a monthly 2-day session together. We are going to come up with questions for the next month's panel. Right? And this time it's going to be a more social, facilitated process. And we're going to learn the skill of asking good questions so that, you know, hopefully the professor have something to talk about. So I'm really excited for this part as well, because I think it's teaching a very important skill that it's not part of regular education.
I agree.
Fantastic. Gerard, why don't you take it up from there? I mean, what do you envision your role in the School of Thinking this year, and what are you bringing form-wise to the students?
Well, I fully agree with the elements that Marta has been talking about, allowing students to actually make their personal feelings and thoughts more active, and also to express them in questions. So what my contribution might be is obviously related to my passion, which I explained, which is to make it possible for people to become aware that certain constraints that they are using are actually not used to their full power. You know, if you think that you are a machine, then people think that they are a machine, but they don't use the theory of machines to their full power. Machines include, for example, computers. So if you think that you are a machine, you might train yourself to act as a computer, but nobody does that. They still act as normal people. So for me, the interesting thing is to help keep the course, if you wish, on the course, which is to help people actually step out of their lives and become and exercise their ability to think. Well, it's called outside the box, but it's actually the course is being able to think inside your own box. So that's what I think my contribution might be. I will depend, of course, on Marta and Maciek if they change the situation because they know the students, then I change. I have no problem to keep rigidly to one topic.
You know, I some of your thoughts there, Gerard, on why I like this idea to think inside your own box, and also it reminds me of your important corrective to 90% of the system scientists in regards to boundaries and the use of boundaries. You know what it reminds me of? I was wondering if this is a connection you've made. Is it reminds me of the idea of J.K. Chesterton's fences. You know, the Chesterton fence. The idea when you encounter a fence, you shouldn't just deconstruct it. You should try and figure out why the fence is there. What do you think about that connection in regards to the fence as like a boundary?
Yes. Well, the obvious connection is to AI in this particular case, because there is now a tendency for quite a few people to think that ChatGPT is close to human thinking. I have a number of discussions like we have where we explore some of the questions, and the challenge is, of course, to think about AI as if it is a fence and not as, you know, an extremely movable and flexible type of fence, which as soon as you approach it, moves away, for example, etc. So the AI is a new type of fence. That's what I would say. Nice.
I like that application. It's an interesting metaphor. I've never really heard it used in that way. So coming upon the end, I was wondering if we could just say a little bit about what Maciek was pointing towards a little bit with the students in the school of thinking traditionally not being the norm, perhaps deviations from the norm, and what the power of the student network is and the student experience is here moving through the school of thinking. I'd imagine it's not just interacting with a number of different professors, although that's of course an important part of it, but also making perhaps some friends along the way and forming a student network. How has that played a role in the school of thinking's history? And what would you imagine moving forward this year? I guess Marta, if you're willing to start there.
Yeah, I'm always a bit cautious, saying, "Oh, it was so great for the students. They are listening here, so maybe they will comment and we should let them say what it has been like for them." From my observation, it's there's at least an equally important aspect of the school of thinking, the community making, yes, and like people join because they want to have social interactions, they want to meet people, they want to be a part of a group. By the end of the year, and it has been every year the same way, they are saying no, let's not finish, and then they try to keep together as a group. So it is a community making process this whole year. with a complaint by the end of the year that it went too fast, and why, you know, and also people have, I don't know if it's a joke or they really mean it, but they say, don't send us out back to lie, whatever it means, like we want to stay. So it seems it is working, and it's important. In terms of the population that the program is attracting, the first year, the average age of our student was something between 45 and 50 years old. So when you say a university student, you might imagine people in their 20s. It's with our program, it's not the case. The last year was a little bit younger, yes. So I think it went down like around 40, maybe even less than that. But yeah, so it's been 3 years. So I wouldn't want to draw trends, but it's really for people who like have already discovered that thinking, you know, and the way you think, the quality of your thinking is actually a thing, you know, and it does influence a lot. And when you are in your 20s, you believe, okay, like, and maybe this is a necessity, you want to like develop yourself in a particular direction, and like, you know, like to follow this fence metaphor, you want to shape yourself up into something else, and then, you know, whatever the shape has been that you have been following, after a while, you know, the question might arise, you know, like you notice that there are ways of using your mind differently, and more you become aware that this is a skill in itself. So it seems to be for mature people already, yes, and already somehow established. A lot of people are. A lot of people come from like multiple backgrounds, like, for example, double degrees. There are people with PhDs. There are people, like, it's often the case that, you know, like people have like master's degree in this and that, you know, and they are like, and additionally they are an entrepreneur and also a kind of like an artist, and also, so this kind of like a maverick environment, that if you imagine a group of people like that, it's really sparkling. And so no wonder it's attractive also socially. Yeah, and in that sense, I don't see much difference between the two groups. You know, it's a different in function. That one group is like, you know, being hired to bring particular content and teach, and the other one is the, you know, the patience here. Yeah, but I don't see much difference in terms of the like a brightness and sparkliness of the two groups meeting on this platform.
Yeah, and to build on that, just maybe two more things. One is that like for many students, it becomes not only a networking experience, but also like an exercise in diversity, right? So if you're saying that, you know, like this whole course wouldn't have any sense without the field trip of interacting with your own mind, there's an equally important aspect of interacting with other people's minds, and with, you know, like the different moments when somebody gets an aha reaction or gets frustrated or says, okay, I don't understand, it's too open-ended, it's too complex, or, you know, whatever else, you know, might be people's reaction to some sort of thinking exercise. Like this whole process of observing each other and interacting with each other as this happens, it's like, I'm not sure if we have planned for this, right? It was kind of like a side effect or like an emergent quality. And it was, I think, I'm not sure if it's going to repeat the same way next year, because part of it was the fact that historically we had 2 COVID years. And so we had people in a very particular situation. We had people who are maybe more anxious than average. We had people who are in a very new setting. We had people who are somehow somewhat isolated from each other, or learning this new way of interacting with each other over, you know, various video conferences and so on and so forth. And we also had an experience of like things that are obvious and unquestionable being questioned, right? And very, very practical impact on our daily lives, that some person somewhere, did something to a bat, and now you're feeling the consequences, right? So like that was a very peculiar couple of years, and I think it had an impact on the quality of social relationships that were forming as we went along, right? There was lots of frustration, lots of true connection, lots of mutual curiosity, and so on and so forth. And the interesting thing, like this year, we were playing. We always play with the idea: do we do it entirely online, or do we do it, in a more on-campus mode, and we do invite people in and so on? So we decided to just open up both paths to the students, and apparently everybody but one person signed up for the on-campus one, right? So which seems like there's like an obvious idea about what people want from this program as well. They want the coffee between the classes as well as the classes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there is something where we get something from physically gathering, we get something from physically being in the same space that perhaps we can't replicate just with the virtual. So it's nice to hear that a lot of people signed up for the physical on-campus experience as well. And that should also enhance, I guess, the networking experience this year for everyone involved. Gerard, is there anything you'd like to add to that before we wrap up?
First one, I fully agree with Marta and Maciek. But there are two things that I would like to add. They are a little bit outside of what they have been saying, or partly maybe inside. The first one is that one of my principles to organize seminars where people come together to discuss, that there must always be coffee and cookies available in the place, not in the rest periods, but just available at any moment. So might be an idea. I always had to pay for it myself in the University of Lincoln, for example, but that's simply because, it was a poor university. And the second thing is, and that's more outside, but I think it's nice to mention, I had occasion in the first year to invite two of the students to write a paper with me. And they extremely valued that very highly and contributed. It meant that I still did most of the work, but they commented on the text and said, this is not clear, you might have another example or things like that. And I made sure that each comment was incorporated. I think that is extremely important in that kind of interaction. It's just a comment, maybe there is an opportunity to do that again, maybe not. It depends very much both on the staff and the students, but I thought it was a nice experience for me.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you to all of you for agreeing to come on here and have this chat. I think the School of Thinking now entering its, I guess, 4th official year. Again, maybe some practical details before we wrap up. For people outside of Belgium, the deadline is August 29th, 2023 to sign up, and there'll be a link in the description. There are some requirements: a master's degree, fluent English, an application letter, and so forth. But hopefully this talk, and again, all the information will be linked in the description, but in the context of this talk, hopefully it gave you a sense of not only the ideas behind the School of Thinking, but some of the people behind the School of Thinking, going towards a totally different educational experience. Of course, there's content, but there's also form, there's also experimentation with form, and in some sense, some risk-taking. in regards to traditional university approaches to education. And there'll be some surprises along the way, as I'm sure there are every year, both with student teacher interaction, but also with student interaction, with networking. And as they emphasize towards the end of the talk there, the community and the networking dynamic is an important social power that comes out of this whole experience. And so that's one of the big incentives, I think, to join up, is to find the other deviants, let's say, that might be out there, and joining you on your thinking path. So before we close up, is to say just one last thing. Is there anything you would tell someone who's on the fence before we sign off there, Marta?
I would say, get out of the fence, look at the fence, and make your mind up. You won't be doing your thinking for you, so make your choice. And also another thing I would say is that where you are participating now, this YouTube channel is a school of thinking as well, and it's brilliant. So let's not exaggerate that we are the only place in the world where you can think.
Thank you. Maciek?
Yeah, and I've tried very hard not to make that like a conversation that is about advertising the program, because I would not watch a two-hour commercial. Right?
No, I don't think this has been at all. I don't think this has been at all.
So we've been like trying really hard not to make that an advertisement. So I'm going to follow Marta and say, well, it's a program. It's not going to change your life, chances are, but it's interesting, right? So if you're curious, if you kind of are willing to enter a conversation, that's what we can provide, right? It's not really magical in a sense, right? It has to be done over the old, flapping your mouth and trying to figure out things.
The old mouth flapping.
Like that. We don't have any new hardware for you, right? We have like printed letters on paper, and we have people who have ideas and want to express them somehow, and so on and so forth. So if that's not scaring you away, if you'd like to have more conversations like the one we had now, then that's maybe the experience for you, right? So that's like the not advertising way of of inviting people in, hopefully.
Right. Fantastic. Yeah, we're using old hardware, but we're developing a little oasis here in the middle of an adult world where it's hard to find these types of environments. So I think that's good. Yeah. Gerard, why don't you? Yep.
Well,
Gerard, if you want to have the last word, go for it.
Very practical.
No pressure.
I would tell the person on the fence, A, that it is an opportunity to get free coffee and cookies.
Oh, well, there you go.
And B, that that person can say anything, whatever idiotic, and still be treated as a rational person. Right
on. Well, I like that sentiment. I also am a big fan of coffee and cookies. I always I try to stay away from the cookies most days, but I've always got a coffee in the morning. And again, just thank you everyone. Thanks to the viewers who've been with us, and thanks to the three of you for joining me for this conversation. And like I said, all information will be linked in the description. And with that, I'm signing off, and have a great evening.